It's a great pleasure to have you all in this auditorium with us to release India's World. I'm deeply honored and privileged to have you all present here today on a sunny Sunday afternoon when you could have been doing nicer things elsewhere than, of course, launch a magazine on India's foreign policy, which, of course, we have appropriately named, in my opinion, India's World. But before I get to the magazine per se, I want to sort of somehow locate and situate the magazine itself in the sort of foreign policy landscape, international relations landscape that we all live in today. Personally speaking, I believe that today is a critical moment in the post-Cold War post-World War international order, post-Second World War international order, and India's engagement with a crisis-ridden and unstable world with failing international institutions. It is also a moment of reckoning for global leaders to consider how to construct a new world order and whether a new world order should resemble the family picture of the victors of the Second World War plus China, or whether it should become more democratic, inclusive, and reflect the realities of our times. For India, I believe, this crisis that we are in, the world is in today, comes with challenges and opportunities. Some might argue that international politics is too esoteric, and therefore countries that are still struggling to emerge as great powers, major powers, countries that are still developing, should focus internally rather than focus on questions that are esoteric. I completely disagree. For what happens in the world will have undeniable consequences on us in India. The bigger you are, more the consequences for you. It is also important for us to focus on the world because this crisis in the world we have today is an opportunity for us, an opportunity to create a new world order, to help create a new world order, and to see this country's rightful place in that new world order. India has always had a distinct view of the world. A cursory glance, for instance, at the last 2 centuries of Indian thinking, writing, and articulations make you marvel at the broad intellectual coherence in this country, despite the political differences, the deeply entrenched curiosity in the Indian political and intellectual class about the international system, about the world, and the sheer tenacity in which Indians sought to pursue an independent, should I say, non-aligned line, reflecting on and engaging the world. This rich history continues to exist in contemporary India, but there is a greater need today than ever before to convey India and India's arguments to the world. As India grows, and it is growing, no doubt, notwithstanding our challenges and problems, our material growth must be underpinned by sophisticated arguments about India's role in the world. While arguments in world politics about material power have inherent limits, material power without arguments has its limits too. And arguments and power must be tailored to a purpose. That is how grand strategies are made. A country India's size and consequence must, therefore, carefully combine arguments, power, and purpose. That is why we chose Delhi's grand strategy as the theme of our inaugural issue. From a dissatisfied power on the margins of revisionist global politics, India has, over the past several decades, in particular the last 3 decades, emerged as a proactive voice, carving out a distinct role for itself on the global stage. Today, this country is an indispensable actor in the international system. The magazine, India's World, seeks to chronicle this transformation and the nation's fast-paced engagement with the global order, while recalling the country's historical contributions to the international system. The age of negation, what some might call the long period of non-alignment in India's foreign policy, is perhaps over. At least that's my belief. The refrain of "we don't like that and we won't do that" has been replaced by an era of ambition, articulation, and agency. India's World is dedicated to capturing that ambition, articulation, and agency. Clearly, India's engagement with the world is not new, nothing new, but today it has taken a proactive dimension, rooted in its historical context, cultural heritages, and civilizational depth. Simultaneously, the world's interest in India has also grown, intensified, viewing India as a significant actor on the world stage. It is increasingly seen as a mediator in global conflicts, a pivotal state in the Indo-Pacific, and a key player in global governance in an age of systemic instability. Of course, the world sees India the way it chooses to see India. But we must, in India, articulate what we must, because arguments and narratives matter in world politics. This evolving story of India's deepening global role deserves to be chronicled, argued, debated, and interpreted through Indian voices. Capturing and amplifying those voices is the mission of this magazine. So, ladies and gentlemen, India's World will tell the story of India's engagement with the world from uniquely Indian perspectives. In doing so, we will take a non-traditional approach. After all, international affairs extend beyond just foreign policy. And India's interests cannot be confined to bilateral relations alone. We are keen on transcending the tyranny of the present, offering a holistic view that explores history, culture, cuisine, music, movies, art, and of course, diplomacy, all rooted in India's world, of course. Why such a large canvas, you would ask me? Because India's engagement with the world, reflected in its varied dimensions, encompasses far more than just bilateral relations. We are far too big for that, I think. The print edition, just a little bit about the magazine itself. The print edition of India's World will be published once every 2 months. In the intervening period, our website, indiasworld.in, will offer fresh, timely essays on India's engagement with the world at large. Each week, we will feature 2 new pieces on key issues in India's international relations, along with weekly briefs on global developments relevant to India's interests. Give us a little more time, and we will bring you state-of-the-art podcasts and videos as well. I really hope you enjoy India's World, its art, its style, its layout, and most importantly, the thought-provoking essays. I warmly welcome all of you to the launch of India's World. Once again, I feel very privileged, and it's a great honor to have you all come to this event today. When, as I said, you could have been doing much better things elsewhere. Thank you so much, and once again, welcome to all of you.
Dr. Raja Mohan, Mr. Happymon Jacob, dear friends, I'm really very pleased to join you today as we release a new platform in a way, not just a magazine. And I'm glad because in a way I see this as an additional forum for debate and argumentation in our country. And I think we need more forums. Now, when one looks at the public space, I think the question really is what is the utility of such exercises, what is the impact of such exercises. And I want to start with a moment of honesty. And that honesty is that if we look back the last 25 years, and I grant you I have a vested interest in this statement, but if you look back the last 25 years, in this country, Track 1 has been consistently ahead of Track 2 when it comes to diplomacy, foreign policy, and keeping up with the world. In fact, if you look at many of the big ideas, much of the advocacy of change, I would say, really, it's interesting that Track 1 has outpaced Track 2. Which is why today I'm happy with this endeavor, because I do think that this dynamic of Track 1, Track 2, government, think tank, official, academic, needs changes in our country. That our public space discourse should not be theological. It should not be polemical. It should not come as a defense of the past versus, you can say, a compulsion to move beyond the past. So I hope very much, and certainly I have an advantage over the rest of you. I've had a chance to read the magazine. So for me, a platform that signifies realism, which is contemporary, which is ambitious, I think it makes such a platform relevant. And it is in that expectation today that I join Dr. Raja Mohan and his team. Now, if one reflects on foreign policy, there are 4 big factors which should cause us to actually ask ourselves what are the changes which are necessary in foreign policy. One, and I happened by coincidence to speak about it yesterday, for many, many years, we had what someone else very pithily summed up as the Nehru development model. That was a book which was yesterday released it was Dr. Arvind Panagaria's book. Now the Nehru foreign development model produced a Nehru foreign policy. I mean, it was obvious. And it wasn't just what was happening in our country. There was an international landscape in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, which was bipolar. Then there was a unipolar landscape. And both those landscapes have also changed. On top of it, we have seen, particularly the last 25 years, a very intense globalization, a strong interdependence between countries. So in a way, the relationship and the behavior of states towards each other has also changed. And finally, if one looks at the impact of technology on foreign policy, technology on state capability, technology actually on our daily existence, that too has changed. So if the domestic model has changed, if the landscape has changed, if the behavioral pattern of states have changed, and if the tools of foreign policy has changed, how can foreign policy remain the same? So my point to you today is, when we speak about changing foreign policy, if there is talk of a post-Nehruvian construct, it should not be treated as a political attack. I mean, it didn't require Narendra Modi to do it. Narasimha Rao started it. So I think we need to be grounded, we need to be realistic, we need to be practical in this country. And the foreign policy discourse within Track 2 and between Track 2 and Track 1 would certainly improve if we move in that direction. Now, of course, when you say, okay, things are going to change, that then begs a different question. So do we defend? Do we manage? Do we advance? Do we do all of the same? And then there's another question, which is one which Raj raised, which today, if our GDP is what it is, if our external exposure is what it is, how ambitious should we be? What is it we are really aiming for? And what should be the timing of what we do? You know, when do we raise our heads, to what degree, on what issue? I think that's also a very important concern. So my point to you is, just like the economic debates and the economic model of this country became more open, I think foreign policy debates, foreign policy thinking of this country also has to keep pace with what is happening in the country and needs to be more open. And for that, it's important to have an integrated outlook, which is why I was very pleased that this opening issue of this magazine starts with some thoughts about grand strategy that are offered by Dr. Mohan. So let's talk a little bit about grand strategy. If today our aspiration at home is to become a Viksit Bharat, surely there must be a foreign policy for Viksit Bharat. And that foreign policy, in a way, I would say, we had about a decade ago suggested the need for India to start thinking of moving towards a leading power, how to be more ambitious, how to plan ahead. Now, some of it is also about positioning. A country will move ahead if it has, in a sense, the most friends, the least problems, the best relationships, the minimal baggage. And in that positioning, I think this concept of Vishwa Bandhu came about, which is a country which, in a way, is friends to all, or nearly all, you could say, friends to the maximum. And if you have friends to a maximum, obviously your positioning is optimal, your problems, common sense would tell you, are minimal. And in that kind of situation, I think we have to also take into account the landscape. Because the global landscape, for a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about it a little bit, has also become very volatile, it's become very turbulent, it's very uncertain. So here you have a picture of an India which is growing. Raj put some numbers on it, which will have a foreign policy which will reflect that growth, which will respond to all the changes that we are talking about in the world, between countries, within countries, which will look at issues like technology, which will look at how the global order itself is changing. So the task which is cut out for us, because Viksit Bharat means India's rise. So how does India's rise amidst uncertainty? And this is a big task, because generally rising powers, like predictability, like stability, they value it more than anything else. But if the reality of the world is going to be something very different, we cannot not rise. We have to continue to rise. We just have to plan it for a very difficult circumstance in which the world is going to be. So how do you do that? As I said, by some mixture of offense, of defense, of hedging, of prudence, of joining in rebalancing, of participating in globalization, or to be more accurate, re-globalization, hopefully on different terms, of taking advantage of interdependence, which is also a point made, I think, in different articles in that magazine, of accelerating multipolarity, and of utilizing for our benefit fully the impact of technology. Now, in the grand strategy essay, which Dr. Mohan has begun this volume with, he has, in a sense, spelled out 4 elements. One, the importance of working with the West. 2, the need for strategic autonomy. 3, the requirement to expand multipolarity. And 4th, the importance of the non-Western world, including the global South. I agree, but I think perhaps a few more elements, or in a sense, a certain set of concepts need to give that flesh and practicality on the ground. And I would today, if I were to present to you a conceptual sense of Indian foreign policy today, I would first invite you to look at the world in concentric circles. So you have a neighborhood, first you can say, a sagar in the oceans, the Act East and Indo-Pacific to the east, the Gulf and the whole link west, and the IMEC to the west, leading all the way up to Eurasia and to Europe. The second is, of course, the world stage, a world stage where increasingly we are a player of consequence, a player to whom others turn to, even if we are bashful at times, and where, therefore, to get the best out of that, we need to have a multi-vector foreign policy. We need to look at an identity of interests with other middle and upper middle powers. We need to focus and play regional contradictions to our benefit, obviously. And we need to create sets of balances whose aggregate actually favors India's rise. But there's a third aspect to it as a concept, and that is a kind of a grand strategy which looks over the horizon. Because if we are to be a leading power one day, if we are to have a strategy that is truly grand, then one has to not plan for today or tomorrow, but for the next generation, maybe even beyond that. And if you look at many of our initiatives in the last decade, the focus on Latin America, the reach out to the CARICOM, the interest in the Pacific Islands, the involvement with new connectivity initiatives, I would suggest to you that this is an India that is actually planning at least a generation ahead, trying to expand its footprint, however likely, but it will be a beginning, and beginnings at the end of the day are the start of processes. So I think to the elements which he has added, I think if we visualize the world in a much more focused way, in a much more actionable way, if we learn to play the world stage more adeptly, which is not without its risks and its anxieties, and if we actually look over the horizon, I think you have the makings here of what would be, in a sense, a multi-generational foreign policy. Now, what are the key issues that such a foreign policy would look at? And I think in all frankness, I mean, they are a mix of the old and new. The issues that we have historically confronted, many of them have not gone away. We have yet to secure our borders. We are still combating terrorism on a very serious scale. So there are the hangovers of the past. There are the requirements of the present. We have already, again, I would say, moved to a foreign policy which is much more directly tasked to advance national development. If you actually look at all the joint communiques, the foreign ministry apparatus, foreign policy apparatus puts out, you would actually see in the last 10 years much greater stress on economic diplomacy. When prime ministers or even foreign ministers go out, there is much more about technology, capital, best practices, collaborations, investments. These actually occupy a much larger space in terms of what we do with other countries. And in that sense, I think we have taken some valuable lessons from other countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia, I think, who were doing it much longer than we were doing. A third issue, which we today, I think I would put that as one of very high priority, which is supply chain reformulations. That the rerouting of supply chains today has both a foreign policy implication, but it also is a great national development opportunity. And that supply chain rerouting, the idea of more resilient, reliable supply chains, it can, in fact, it is already spurring manufacturing in this country. But it is also, in a way, a catalyst for technology growth in India. Talking of which, the digital era, I think, has a foreign policy requirement of its own. Because the digital era is fundamentally different from the manufacturing era. The kind of hedging that could be done in manufacturing. At the end of the day, products were products. Whereas something digital is not just a product anymore, it's a data emitter. So we have today to build into our economics, but certainly our global partnerships, the sense of trust and transparency as a factor. So often now it is not a question of who's competitively priced. It is also very much an issue of whose products and services you trust. Where would you like your data to be? Where are other people likely to use your data against you? I think these are all concerns which will be important. Flowing from that, I think there's a new reality, another new reality which is happening, which is a global workplace. That if one looks in terms of Indians working abroad, it's growing in leaps and bounds. In many cases, in individual relationships in the last few years, it's grown by hundreds of thousands. So it's interesting today that the countries where there is a large Indian population are no longer those where it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And this is likely to change much faster. As a ballpark figure, there are, I think, about 33, 34 million Indian nationals and persons of Indian origin working abroad. So even if one leaves out persons of Indian origin, that still gives us something like 17, 18 million people who are working abroad. And I assure you, these numbers are going to go dramatically in the coming years. In fact, probably the most frequent conversations I have today, particularly with my counterparts and other ministers in developed countries, is actually about mobility. So we are going to see an explosion in mobility because there will be a demand for talent coupled with very sharp demographic deficits in different parts of the world. So that too is a change which is waiting to happen. Then I mentioned connectivity. Now, again, we inherited the disrupted connectivity of the colonial times. And really, for many decades, we have not made a great effort to rebuild or resurrect the pre-colonial connectivity. And that has worked to our disadvantage. So today, if you look to the West. I mean, we have the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Yes, it has challenges right now, but it's very clear everybody is very determined to take that forward. There is also the International North-South Transport Corridor, which has a different set of partners. If one looks to the east, you have the Trilateral Highway, which the ambitious form of it will actually end up somewhere in the Gulf of Tonkin. So actually, when you put all these connectivity initiatives in place, and they do take years, sometimes maybe a decade to realize, actually the world's going to be very, very different. And for India, it's going to be very, very different because a lot of this connectivity is going to run through India. And then I would say, if one again looks at the world order itself no longer encourages fixed point collaborations. Depending on the agenda, depending on the theater, you have a different combination of countries. So you can have an India in the Quad, you can have an India in the BRICS, you can have it in the SCO. We can be part of the global, we can lead the global South. We can be present at G7 meetings. So how do you actually fashion your foreign policy to maximize your involvement in issues, your presence in different regions, and your shaping of multiple outcomes? So it calls for a different kind of flexibility and nimbleness in a way. And moving beyond that, I think, again, I come back to the capability point. We are today a country of whom there are greater expectations, a country which actually has greater responsibilities. So the idea of India as a first responder, I can predict will actually get more and more frequent. I mean, pretty much anything in the expanded neighborhood region, I think there would be an expectation that in some way India be part of an international response whenever such a thing is warranted. And finally, of course, because the world is changing, there will be new ideas, there will be new initiatives. We have already seen, Quad is a good example of one, IMEC is an example of another, or the International Solar Alliance, or indeed the I2U2 in the Middle East. So the whole construct, in a way, is going to be more open architecture, more multiple choices, but much deeper involvement, many more complex decisions in a way. But what it definitely, it's very hard to predict how it's going to go, but I can tell you how one thing is for sure, that the kind of defensive crouch into which we had, for a variety of reasons, got into, that era is really decisively behind us. I think we have to do very much more with the world. I think it's for the good of this country that our own progress and development will accelerate with a deeper engagement with the world. So my sense for a foreign policy ahead would really be to think big, to think long, but to think smart. So that, I hope, are concepts which in some way or the other I find reflected in the volume, in the issues to come. Once again, I congratulate all those for whom this labor of love has finally materialized. And really, I must say, I would be your initial public reader, and I can tell you the reader response is a very good one. So thank you very much. Of participating in globalization, or to be more accurate, re-globalization, hopefully on different terms. Of taking advantage of interdependence, which is also a point made, I think, in different articles in that magazine. Of accelerating multipolarity, and of utilizing for our benefit fully the impact of technology. Now, in the grand strategy essay, which Dr. Mohan has begun this volume with, he has, in a sense, spelled out 4 elements. 1, the importance of working with the West. 2, the need for strategic autonomy. 3, the requirement to expand multipolarity. And 4th, the importance of the non-Western world, including the global South. I agree. But I think perhaps a few more elements, or in a sense, a certain set of concepts need to give that flesh and practicality on the ground. And I would today, if I were to present to you a conceptual sense of Indian foreign policy today, I would first invite you to look at the world in concentric circles. So you have a neighborhood, first you can say, a sagar in the oceans, the Act East and Indo-Pacific to the east, the Gulf and the whole link west, and the IMEC to the west, leading all the way up to Eurasia and to Europe. The second is, of course, the world stage. a world stage where increasingly we are a player of consequence, a player to whom others turn to, even if we are bashful at times, and where, therefore, to get the best out of that, we need to have a multi-vector foreign policy. We need to look at an identity of interests with other middle and upper middle powers. We need to focus and play regional contradictions to our benefit, obviously. And we need to create sets of balances whose aggregate actually favors India's rise. But there's a third aspect to it as a concept, and that is a kind of a grand strategy which looks over the horizon. Because if we are to be a leading power one day, if we are to have a strategy that is truly grand, then one has to not plan for today or tomorrow, but for the next generation, maybe even beyond that. And if you look at many of our initiatives in the last decade, the focus on Latin America, the reach out to the CARICOM, the interest in the Pacific Islands, the involvement with new connectivity initiatives, I would suggest to you that this is an India that is actually planning at least a generation ahead, trying to expand its footprint, however likely, but it will be a beginning, and beginnings at the end of the day are the start of processes. So I think to the elements which he has added, I think if we visualize the world in a much more focused way, in a much more actionable way, if we learn to play the world stage more adeptly, which is not without its risks and its anxieties, and if we actually look over the horizon, I think you have the makings here of what would be, in a sense, a multi-generational foreign policy. Now, what are the key issues that such a foreign policy would look at? And I think in all frankness, I mean, they are a mix of the old and new. The issues that we have historically confronted, many of them have not gone away. We have yet to secure our borders. We are still combating terrorism on a very serious scale. So there are the hangovers of the past. There are the requirements of the present. We have already, again, I would say, moved to a foreign policy which is much more directly tasked to advance national development. If you actually look at all the joint communiques, the foreign ministry apparatus, foreign policy apparatus puts out, you would actually see in the last 10 years much greater stress on economic diplomacy. When prime ministers or even foreign ministers go out, there is much more about, technology, capital, best practices, collaborations, investments. These actually occupy a much larger space in terms of what we do with other countries. And in that sense, I think we have taken some valuable lessons from other countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia, I think, who were doing it much longer than we were doing. A third issue, which we today, I think I would put that as one of very high priority, which is supply chain reformulations. That the rerouting of supply chains today has both a foreign policy implication, but it also is a great national development opportunity. And that supply chain rerouting, the idea of more resilient, reliable supply chains, it can, in fact, it is already spurring manufacturing in this country. But it is also, in a way, a catalyst for technology growth in India. Talking of which, the digital era, I think, calls, again, has a foreign policy requirement of its own. Because the digital era is fundamentally different from the manufacturing era. The kind of hedging that could be done in manufacturing, At the end of the day, products were products. Whereas something digital is not just a product anymore, it's a data emitter. So we have today to build into our economics, but certainly our global partnerships, the sense of trust and transparency as a factor. So often now it is not a question of who's competitively priced. It is also very much an issue of whose products and services you trust. Where would you like your data to be? Where are other people likely to use your data against you? I think these are all concerns which will be important. Flowing from that, I think there's a new reality, another new reality which is happening, which is a global workplace. That if one looks in terms of Indians working abroad, it's growing in leaps and bounds. In many cases, in individual relationships in the last few years, it's grown by hundreds of thousands. So it's interesting today that the countries where there is a large Indian population are no longer those where it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And this is likely to change much faster. As a ballpark figure, there are, I think, about 33, 34 million Indian nationals and persons of Indian origin working abroad. So even if one leaves out persons of Indian origin, that still gives us something like 17, 18 million people who are working abroad. And I assure you, these numbers are going to go dramatically in the coming years. In fact, probably the most frequent conversations I have today, particularly with my counterparts and other ministers in developed countries, is actually about mobility. So we are going to see an explosion in mobility because there will be a demand for talent coupled with very sharp demographic deficits in different parts of the world. So that too is a change which is waiting to happen. Then I mentioned connectivity. Now, again, we inherited the disrupted connectivity of the colonial times. And really, for many decades, we have not made a great effort to rebuild or resurrect the pre-colonial connectivity. And that has worked to our disadvantage. So today, if you look to the West. I mean, we have the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Yes, it has challenges right now, but it's very clear everybody is very determined to take that forward. There is also the International North-South Transport Corridor, which has a different set of partners. If one looks to the east, you have the Trilateral Highway, which the ambitious form of it will actually end up somewhere in the Gulf of Tonkin. So actually, when you put all these connectivity initiatives in place, and they do take years, sometimes maybe a decade to realize, actually the world's going to be very, very different. And for India, it's going to be very, very different because a lot of this connectivity is going to run through India. And then I would say, if one again looks at the world order itself no longer encourages fixed point collaborations. Depending on the agenda, depending on the theater, you have a different combination of countries. So you can have an India in the Quad, you can have an India in the BRICS, you can have it in the SCO. We can be part of the global, we can lead the global South, we can be present at G7 meetings. So how do you actually fashion your foreign policy to maximize your involvement in issues, your presence in different regions, and your shaping of multiple outcomes? So it calls for a different kind of flexibility and nimbleness in a way. And moving beyond that, I think, again, I come back to the capability point. We are today a country of whom there are greater expectations, a country which actually has greater responsibilities. So the idea of India as a first responder, I can predict will actually get more and more frequent. I mean, pretty much anything in the expanded neighborhood region I think there would be an expectation that in some way India be part of an international response whenever such a thing is warranted. And finally, of course, because the world is changing, there will be new ideas, there will be new initiatives. We have already seen, Quad is a good example of one, IMEC is an example of another, or the International Solar Alliance, or indeed the I2U2 in the Middle East. So the whole construct, in a way, is going to be more open architecture, more multiple choices, but much deeper involvement, many more complex decisions in a way. But what it definitely, it's very hard to predict how it's going to go, but I can tell you how one thing is for sure, that the kind of defensive crouch into which we had, for a variety of reasons, got into, that era is really decisively behind us. I think we have to do very much more with the world. I think it's for the good of this country that our own progress and development will accelerate with a deeper engagement with the world. So my sense for a foreign policy ahead would really be to think big, to think long, but to think smart. So that, I hope, are concepts which in some way or the other I find reflected in the volume, in the issues to come. Once again, I congratulate all those for whom this labor of love has finally materialized. And really, I must say, I would be your initial public reader, and I can tell you the reader response is a very good one. So thank you very much.
Welcoming so many of our friends who come here this evening to come and support this venture. So it's really wonderful to see so many friends here. Really pleased. So let me welcome all of you for this evening's program. Of course, special thanks to the minister, who's been very generous with his support for ventures like this. As many of you know, he's been instrumental in promoting a wider discourse on India's international affairs. The Raisina dialogue started when he was the Foreign Secretary, then the Global Technology Summit, which I had a chance to work with him from Carnegie, India, and then the Economic Dialogue in Bombay and later in Pune. So over the last decade, I think what we've seen are really a foreign minister actively promoting wider discourse, and he also travels a lot to different parts of the country, reaching at partly political work and partly reaching out to the younger students in the universities. So I don't think foreign policy or diplomacy has been so popular or so widest possible interest today that we find. So that's really a testament to some of the initiatives that you have taken. But today I think I just wanted to make 3 broad points before I invite the minister to release the magazine. One, I think I must tell you, this is a labor of love. The magazine that we produced, it's really not a professional business venture. This is really a bunch of academic nerds trying to raise a journal of the kind that we see in foreign affairs or foreign policy. Many of us write there. But I think the idea that we could have something similar in India, getting as many scholars to participate and join in the discourse. So it's really a venture that hopefully will become a valuable platform for a wider discourse that will also draw in. That's one of our objectives, to get younger scholars. Today, I've seen really over the last 50 years since I've been in this business. When I started out, there was only Sapru House, there was School of International Studies, and there was no. But no, I'm talking about the institutions. Yeah, so you had just 3 institutions. You had the Indian Council of World Affairs, then you had the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, the School of International Studies, and very little else. Yeah, the university. Yeah. But today, I think we have really a much wider set of people ready to participate in the discourse on international affairs. So it's really been really wide interest, really organic growth in the number of people today who are interested in international affairs. One measure of it is the minister has Twitter following, 4 million? Around that, yeah. So it's not just the minister. The JSXP today has almost 2 million followers. I remember a time when he barely had 10,000. So that was just barely 10 years ago. So it tells you how much interest there is in India and how much of, how much people want to know about what India is doing and how they want to participate in that. The second point I wanted to make was really the question of timing, that it's really, I think the intensity and the expansion of India's diplomatic and foreign policy activity over the last decade has really created, I think, new conditions for way India deals with the world. That is, we are, in some ways, at an inflection point in terms of how India relates to the world. It was the German philosopher Hegel who said, quantity translates into quality, that the more you trade with the world, the more your economic weight in the international system, the quality of how we relate to the world also changes. And I think that is the big change that has taken place in the last few years, I think. If you go back to 1990, turn of the 1990s, India's total GDP was about $300 billion. And an annual two-way trade of $40 billion. 300 billion GDP, 40 billion trade. But today we're talking about a aggregate GDP of 4 trillion. And the trade, if you include both goods and services, it's close to $1.3, $1.4 trillion of trade that we have. That is nearly 40 to 50% of India's economic activity is related to the world. And I think this is a fundamentally different type of India, different from the one which I grew up in. The nature and the extent of India's interaction with the world, I think, is really at a very, very different level. And I think this, in turn, I think demands much greater, debates and exposure. And the final point I wanted to make is the fact that while you can say the dramatic expansion of interest in foreign affairs, you just have to go to YouTube, Twitter, the number of people writing, commenting about international affairs has dramatically grown. But I think it's what we also need is a more professional discourse, where those who are studying, dealing, have been practitioners to actually engage with the issues in a professional way and develop a discourse that is not partisan, that is not tied to one party or the other. There will always be politics or foreign policy or diplomacy, but I think there's room and a need for a professional discourse on India's engagement with the world. And I think at any given point, there will be more than one way of doing things. And I think having a good debate on how that options that we have without being partisanly critical or ad hominem critics of government or the opposition, there is a huge room, I think, to develop the discourse. Hopefully, so this journal will contribute to that kind of a professional discourse. So my final appeal to you, please take a subscription when you go out. As I said, it's a labor of love. Policies, either we are amplifying government positions or we are attacking it for political reasons. The conformism, is that something built into our strategic culture? I mean, is that something we can actually change?
I am not sure it's conformism because, if it was conformism and changes started happening, then the conformist side would also reflect that in the public discourse. I think there is a kind of a time lag. I think there is a hysteresis, if you would, that there is very rapid change, but many parts of our society cannot or do not wish to keep up with those changes. So some of it becomes political. But I think in many cases it's also not political, but it is a comfort of a certain habit. And possibly in some sections, a certain validation. Look, if I went through 20, 30 years of something, and now you suddenly come and tell me, you know what, the world has changed and everything that you believed and advocated maybe doesn't work anymore. I'm not likely to take to it very kindly. So there's a natural human resistance. So change is very hard to actually, it's very easily said. I mean, look even on the economic side. I mean, where there are material benefits riding on the compulsions of change. But yet, I would say the intellectual resistance to it sometimes can be very, very strong. Now, in foreign policy, because it tends to be more, in a way, at least the argumentation is very ephemeral. It's not like people contest you with numbers or say, that relationship doesn't matter. It often comes down to very, abstract concepts like, are you doing this? Are you compromising your sovereignty? You're doing this, but you are leaning too much towards one country. This is not our tradition because Nehru wouldn't have done it. Now, those are habits picking up, today.
No, talking of Nehru, I mean, I think 75 years after independence, are we really ready to historicize the relationship rather than viewing it from current politics, that actually there is a history, we can't undo it, that's a reality. Therefore, at least in your books, I mean, you tried to question some of the past assumptions. Is that debate, you see, growing? And I think we need to look back without recrimination, without, allegations that this what happened, this the circumstance, the conditions for which it arose, and how do we advance beyond that?
In a way, yes, Raj, but I would put it this way. I think different worlds will have to do it their particular way. Now, clearly in the political world, it will have a polemical side, But I don't think that the foreign policy intellectual world should really get overly influenced by the political side. I mean, leave politicians to do what politicians do. But the media world or the academic world should do what journalists or academics are supposed to do. And I think they ideally should be able to look at it much more objectively, because unlike, the political world by very definition is a partisan world, which is not the case. So I would argue that in many ways the ability to objectively assess our past has to come from the, you can say, the track 2 world, from the think tank world, from the university world, from the media world, from the cultural world, that they can actually look back. Again, I mean, it's not anybody's contention that everything in the past was wrong. And therefore, it should not be anybody's contention that everything was right and therefore immutable. I think there is a reality out there. We need to have a balanced view of that reality. There has to be, as you say, historicize it, make an objective evaluation of what went right, what went wrong. Because, again, there will be a category of decisions in foreign policy or in economic policy which could not have been foreseen at that time, but with the benefit of hindsight, you can pass a judgment. But I think there was a category of decisions which could have been foreseen, in fact was foreseen, that there were live debates at that particular point saying, I don't think that's a good thing to do, I think this is a better thing to do.
You're referring to Nehru Patel?
Well, and Nehru Patel, even issues with the post-partition Nehru Liaquat Pact. So there would be, even frankly our US policy, that there were words of caution. Yesterday in Parliament, in the context of our Constitution, there were many references to Dr. Ambedkar's resignation letter. Now, mostly these are domestic, political and social issues. But those of you who are interested in international relations, please look at that letter. Because there's a foreign policy issue there. That he actually feels essentially that we have unnecessarily antagonized the United States. So there were people who all through the 50s, I mean, it was not their contention that we didn't have problems with the US. What they were saying is, look, why am I picking a fight with the US on behalf of China? That's not my vital national interest. Now, it was not said after 62. There's not hindsight saying after the war you said, why am I doing it? These are people who said it in 50, 51, 53, 54.
One of the things you said about track 2, one level we used to complain in the old days, not enough material is available, archives are not available. But today actually, the MEA archives are actually a lot more is available today in the public domain. But is there enough transparency in terms of what happens today? For example, a lot of questions have been raised about the deal that you signed with China. Is there enough detail and knowledge so that we can debate that objectively?
As a general question, I think when it comes to transparency, it's important for policymakers, for the government to communicate, which is why we are sitting here and having this conversation. So if you look, not just at us, though I think we have done very well in that department, across the world, the diplomatic world, the government world, every government today tries to put out its version, its narrative. So to that extent, yes, but there is then the compulsion of diplomacy. You can't conduct diplomacy by putting everything out there in the open, because then, what could happen will never happen because it became difficult even before it started. So I would argue that at one level there is not just a responsibility or obligation, I would actually argue there's a benefit of communication. At the same time, there's the reality of diplomacy, and diplomacy by nature is a confidential exercise. So, I'll answer the China bit, but I would refer to another example in which, I have direct experience, which was the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal had to be done that way, because had it been not done that time and in that manner, it would have never happened. I think the forces opposed to it would have actually made sure that it would have never taken off. So I think it's important to get this balance. Look, where China is concerned, it's an account where there has been much more reticence. Not now. Today people are talking about transparency. In 2005, and may come as a surprise to some of the younger people in the room, in 2005 we actually agreed with China that we were strategic partners. Now, was there a debate in this country that we should be strategic partners with another country which occupies 38,000 square kilometers of your territory and has claim to 70,000, 90,000 more? There wasn't. In fact, I remember when the strategic partnership was decided, I had army people come to me and ask me saying, they were scratching their head saying, explain this to us. Similarly, in 2006, it was agreed that we would start negotiating or look at a preferential trade agreement. Was there consultation with industry on it? No, I don't think so. Today the transparency issue is coming up with regarding to borders. Okay. In 1995, we resolved the Sumdurongchu issue. That disengagement agreement of 1995 still has the highest level classification in Government of India. So when people talk about transparency, let us remember what the history is. In the last 4.5 years, I have seen more debates about China than I've seen in 40 years before that. Many of you today are conversant with the word PP, patrolling point. Which one of you had heard of it before 2020? Even the words, even the lexicon was not there. So today to come and say we must have transparency on this and that. Look, there are issues, yes, we have an obligation to inform, we do. But I think the expectation that it would be done, in very great detail to the detriment of what is the operational comfort and the diplomatic strategy of a country, I think it's not a reasonable expectation. So, like anything, transparency has a place. It's a kind of a I would say something you need to take with a sense of balance, but also understanding often behind transparency is something non-transparent.
I think there's a well-known saying, if there are no negotiations in secret, there are no covenants to sign in public.
Yeah,
so to some extent, you need your business demands secrecy. But I think it's partly, I think our job as think tanks and media to question, to dig up the previous arguments, the records, what is available internationally. So I think we need to do a lot more as well to be able to bring in transparency and a historical rather than an immediate perspective. One issue, Minister, you talked about the relationship between economics and foreign policy. For a long time, and I think if you see the debates on Indian foreign policy, I mean, it looks like economics has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. We have notions like non-alignment, strategic autonomy, independent foreign, which actually economics seems to be something really not central to it. But what you're saying is really, both in the history as well as today, economics actually as a foundation, most countries know, economics is the foundation for hard power. And without that, everything else is really... So the point you're making today or yesterday again, I mean, that the relationship between economic strategy, economic salience of your partners, how that shapes our relations.
Yes, I think you are right. They have been more disconnected than was good for our country. And I think they often, therefore, led us in wrong directions. I mean, if you take, for example, the broad foreign policy establishment, I hear not just the government, but the bigger thinking in the country. For a variety of reasons, because again it's connected, its past habits, its historical experiences, there was a sharp anti-Western tinge to it. Okay? Maybe stronger than a tinge. Now, look at the reality on the ground. Who are your major trade partners? Who are your major technology partners? Where do many people go for education? Where do a whole lot of people go for tourism? So, where does much of your investment come from? So, all that points in one direction. And sometimes the foreign policy points in a different direction. So, sometimes, as I say, but it's not a bad idea to do a reality check on the Indian street. The Indian street also has a common sense view of what is good for the country. And I think often, because the habits are strong, because, again, it's not illogical. They're shaped by some previous experience. So, we also have to, somewhere get it into our heads that the past will not always be a guide for the future. That there will have to be experimentation and exploration to try and, because the world is changing. So I would say a tighter economic foreign policy, economic diplomatic, and I would say even security. Because at times, if you look at if you ask the security establishment the view, that was not necessarily the view of the foreign policy establishment. So today I would argue that one of the changes is that the economic side, the security side, the orthodox foreign policy diplomatic side, they are much more tightly integrated, and their decision making is much more cohesive than it has been in the past.
So while trade and technology really expanded our engagement with the West, when it came to energy, for example, the relationship with Russia, where we stood firm in the last 3 years of the Ukraine war. As also you often talked about the importance of Russia and the Eurasian balance of power. Maybe you could just expand how that part plays into the larger strategy.
Well, where Russia is concerned, I mean, it's a very, in a way, a very unique aspect of our foreign policy. Again, understandably, because of the history, a lot of people are habituated to think in terms of the Soviet era relationship. Okay. Now, Russia has moved beyond Soviet Union. Sometimes analysis in India has not always kept pace. But the fact is, put that aside. I mean, Russia is a major power. I mean, and certainly in Eurasia, I mean, it is a major power globally. But in Eurasia, it is something even more than a major power. So, in my view, even whatever your ideological preferences, I mean, to me, it's like an international relations 101. In IR 101, your neighbor's neighbor has an enormous value. Now, in our case, it's something much more than that, because the historical experiences have been largely positive. Okay? And today we are finding new convergences and new intersections. Look, a country like India at this stage of its growth, I would just think, if you are today $4 trillion minus whatever it is, I mean, you'll soon be. And we are saying, okay, we have 7 to 8% growth for decades ahead of us. Who would be our crucial partners in the world? I think to a large extent, the major resource powers of the world. So I would actually argue here that India's economic trajectory will put a certain premium on a country like Russia or in Indonesia or in Australia or a Brazil or even a Canada. So again, this is part of the changing metrics. As we grow bigger, our partners will not be just because somebody was nice to you before. That's not the logic. There's also a new compulsion and a new, in a sense, a new rationalization of who our partners are going to be.
So maybe just a couple more before we go to the audience. You talked so much. I think this government has done so much on migration and mobility. It's a big shift from the past where we kind of derided migration, particularly professional migration. But now you actually seeing it as a virtue. But it is really the market that welcomed Indian professionals, Western markets, where they needed human beings. Now they need STEM people. But we're also at a moment in the West where there's a toxic anti-immigrant feeling. So how do you balance these two elements? Do we just leave it, market will take care of it, or do we actively need to promote migration and mobility agreements?
No, I don't think you can leave it just to the markets. I think many governments also look for reassurance and look for solutions. So it has to be intergovernment to a certain extent. It will still be significantly market-driven. But bear in mind that in many countries, and I heard this very strongly in Europe, a sense of which migrants or which talent is more well regarded and which is less so. So it's not like everybody is necessarily tarred in every country with the same brush. I would put it to you that it's in our interest today to engage the world on mobility so that other countries, partner countries, have a sense of what Indian talent and Indian mobility means. It is not the same as, say, economic refugees coming from some conflict zone. So we have to, it's up to us to do that brand differentiation. It is for us to actually, in a sense, market may deal with it, but we can certainly, as a country, as a government, we can expand and improve that market. So I think it has, everybody's got to take the fair share of this load.
Okay. One last question on China. I mean, On the economic side, we have a huge relationship with China, but we also have a massive trade deficit, which is almost $100 billion a year. Now, how do we transcend this to one where there's peaceful coexistence, because we are neighbors, neither of us are going to disappear from this region, and at the same time create conditions under which we actually can live peacefully and also benefit economic cooperation between the two. The current paradigm has not really worked. So what is it you're looking ahead as you think of dealing with China, beyond the immediate disengagement, etc.?
You know, look, eventually, obviously, it's in the interest of both countries to reach an equilibrium. And conceptually, it's difficult to do because both are changing in absolute terms and vis-a-vis the world. So it's a very complex equation. You know, the world is changing, they are changing, their relationship with the world is changing, and the relationship with each other is also changing. So in all these changes, how do you find an equilibrium? Is not going to be easy. So that would be the preferred alternative. But the problem is right now we're still grappling with the short term. And right now the short term will focus on de-escalation because, while the disengagement has been worked out, there are other issues which confront us.
Since we talked about America, Russia, and China, I mean, I think we can't leave Europe out. So there, I mean, you in your early formulation, where you said, look, engage America, reassure Russia, manage China, and cultivate Europe. How is the cultivation of Europe going? I mean, it's really, there's been a lot more attention to Europe in the last decade. Is that leading to a culmination where we can actually translate it into concrete outcomes?
Yes. I think the cultivation of Europe from the Indian perspective is certainly growing. I can see some people from Europe in the room, and I can imagine that they would not dispute that actually probably the kind of attention and the intensity of exchanges we've had in the last few years would be almost without precedent. But that doesn't automatically translate into outcomes. Today, many of our key concerns, when we speak about supply chains, when we speak about digital relationships, when we talk about AI, conversations about semiconductors, in all of this, Europe is a very, very important partner. The second, I think there's also a realization that while we each would approach the world, obviously from our vantage point and our interests, there is a broad intersection there which needs to be built upon. I've seen a lot of European interest in IMEC. I've seen a lot of European interest in mobility. I would say even on something as tricky as the conflict in Ukraine, I think whatever our earlier conversations with Europe today, my sense right now from my European colleagues is that they are quite encouraging of India trying to be helpful in some way in regard to this conflict.
Sort of reshaping its post-Afghanistan South Asia policy and the extent to which we have a no-holds-barred dialogue with the Americans, not just on the bilateral engagement, but also on what we can do together with each other in how India protects and promotes interests in neighborhood. Thank you.
I think Professor Chaturvedi, we're going to take one more after this, and then we have to really have a hard stop.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Sanjay Chaturvedi from South Asian University. As the leading voice of new confident India, you have always been looking ahead and asking us to look ahead of the contemporary. As India takes over now as the chair of Indian Ocean Rim Association, what do you think would be one of the top priorities on our agenda? And also given the fact that we live in a very multi-spatial world, going beyond the spaces of national jurisdictions, in India's Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, what should be India's approach to the governance of global commons, right from the deep seabed to the atmosphere to outer space and Antarctica. Thank you so
We'll
much.
take one more and then we'll close. Yeah. Rahul? Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, my question is, you said India wants to accelerate multipolarity in international order, but international ordering principle is pegged to bipolarity today, because if we see the indexes, they are basically moving towards bipolarity. So how do you basically conceptualize multipolarity, and what parameters do you think is world and India leading so as to translate the system into multipolarity? Thank you.
Swasti, you wanted to ask, and since I didn't ask any woman, I mean, it's absolutely, so keep it really brief. Very brief.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I just see a lot of discussion here on grand strategy, but I do sometimes wonder, why do we still continue with this disdain of having a well-formulated national security strategy? Because in my opinion, it often leads to counterproductive strategic discourse. So what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all we can take. We really have to vacate this place.
Okay. So starting with the question about the US. Look, US is a global power. Okay, so US has interests of various kinds. We are a country whose there is always been a strong regional dimension, but we are going now beyond, you could say, extra regional. In our own region, there will be issues and relationships on which there will be intersections or convergences with the United States, and there will be some where there would not be. So I think as part of our relationship with the US, we should, and we do, I must tell you, we have very honest conversations on where we agree and where we don't. And because that relationship between India and US is such an important and large relationship, we factor these conversations, but we do keep advancing that relationship. So just because India-US relations are, strong and growing and improving, it doesn't mean that there is a congruence and that on every issue in our region we have identical or supportive positions. I think the events and record is quite clear on this score. On the question of global commons, IORA, look, it's a very big issue. Because we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is a philosophical outlook. Okay, it would encourage us to evolve international relations concepts in tune with that outlook. But overall, I would say when it comes to global commons, we do believe in the importance of international law. We do contribute more and more to the well-being and efficiency of the global commons. So if you look at many regimes, in the last 10 years, it's again a very interesting thing. In the last 10 years, I requested one of my colleagues to tell me how many regimes and arrangements have we joined. I think the last time we checked, it was in excess of 40. So, look, the world is changing today. We cannot take very orthodox national positions and assume somehow the rest of the world is going to run well. Because part of it is also, there's the reality. The United States is going to contribute less to the global commons. Whether it wants to or whether it's a conscious choice, that's irrelevant. So we are looking at a very different world, and I think in a way, I would even put it to you that the Quad is an outcome also of concern for what is happening in the global commons. The third question, your statement, if I understood you right, you felt that the world is returning to bipolarity. Did I understand that right? Yeah, I must differ with you there. I think, yes, there is the United States, which is still the only truly global power. I grant you, in many respects, China certainly economically in many areas of technology would be high in the ranking. But, there are many areas where, let us say, it'll be, Russia has a very crucial position. But there would be other countries, other players as well. Today, just look at what is happening in the Middle East. That is a classic example today. See which are the countries involved in the problem solving in the Middle East. Whether it is Syria, whether it is Gaza, or anything else. In the old bipolar days, it was US, and so look at 73 for example. It was a US-Soviet sort of shuttling which was dealing with that. So I don't believe that there is a possibility of returning to that era. China may become bigger. The United States may remain very strong. But I think today there are a whole host of other countries, and these countries, particularly in their own region, that's why I said it's an issue of multipolarity, middle power plus, and regional powers. These form a very, very potent combination, and I would suggest to you the dispersion of power is much more diffused than your question would suggest. The last question, again, I didn't fully get that, but
National security strategy.
do we need
We have debated many times in the NSAB.
Yes. No, if you ask me, should we have a national security strategy? The answer is yes. In a way, I would even say that there is one. But again, look, every country has its own way of communication, its own way of policy formulation. Because somebody else puts out a document every 3 years or 4 years and says, that is my national security. It is not necessary I follow that model. I could have it, I could tell you that it exists, but I have to kill you if I tell you. So the point is, look, different countries deal with this differently. But there is definitely a very, I would say, if you just look at the fact that we had an NSA institution, come up just about 30 years ago. Okay? Today, if you see how much that institution itself has evolved, that's one indication. But if you look at other ways of decision making and the inputs that go into it, the kind of I'll give you a very interesting example. Take semiconductors. Today, semiconductors is justified in the name of national security, other than, economic competitiveness. So there is, I think, a growth in the sense of what is national security in the country, and I think we would deal with it our own way.
Foreign Policy magazine into an actual magazine that you can actually hold in your hands. Ursh Danish, Suganya Sharma, Manu Sharma, Haley Desai, Jay Ankit Tiwari, Gaurav Saini, and all my young friends at the India's World, a big thank you to all of you. This wouldn't have been possible without you. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have once more request to put your hands together for my team at India's World. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful evening.